Here I have 6 basic geometric forms. They are a sphere, a cube, a pyramid, a cone, a rectangular prism, and a cylinder. So first, take your modeling clay and split it up into 6 different pieces. Try to make the pieces as even as possible. And I've got 6 pieces. Now what I'm going to do is just kind of add to each of them until they're fairly even in size. Okay, so I'm going to start with just one piece, and I'm going to start by creating a sphere. So a sphere is a completely rounded orb, and it has no imperfections in it, no flat sides. So what I'll do is I'll start by taking my clay and rolling it between my hands in a circular motion. So I'm keeping the clay right in the center of my palm, and I'm putting pressure on it just a little bit to form the clay into a sphere. Once it's relatively round, I can then kind of take my fingertips and just push and pinch until the sphere is extremely round. As much as I can get it using my hands. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is take another piece of clay and I'm going to make a cube. A cube is a little trickier. What I'm going to do though is start with a sphere first. So I'm rolling it right in the center of my palms. And now what I'll do is flatten the sides. A cube has 6 flat sides. So to get started, what I'll do is I'll hold the clay like this, and I'm just going to use my thumb to press down on the top of the sphere to flatten it. Then what I'll do is I'll pick it up and turn it on its side, and I'll continue doing that until I have pressed on all 6 sides. So this isn't quite a cube yet, it's still kind of rounded looking. So now what we'll do is pick up our clay and we'll begin to tap the clay on the table or on the paper to make the sides flat. So we're pushing and tapping the clay against the table is flat, so it will flatten out the sides. And this does take a while because the clay doesn't go automatically into the form that you want it, because the clay is a little bit stiff. But slowly you'll start to see these flat sides take shape. And one thing you don't want to do either is squeeze the clay too hard as you're tapping it down on the table. Otherwise you'll get depressions in the side of the cube from your fingers. And if you take a look at your cube, if you feel like you have too much clay on one side of your cube and you feel like it's uneven, like there should be more clay on this side, what you can do is just take your finger and slide the clay across that side to where it really should be. So we're just kind of smearing the clay over to even out the side. You can do that as much as you need to. as you can see, it's becoming more and more flat on each side as I do this. But it does take patience. Eventually your form will begin to emerge more as you work on it, just as any clay project would take time. Okay, so we have our cube. I'm going to move on to the next one. We're actually going to hop over to the cylinder, so we're going to make that next. So what I'm going to do is take my clay and I'm going to roll it between my hands, or I could also roll it on the table with my hand like this. And once it starts to roll out and it becomes round, I'm then going to flip it up and tap the ends. And you may have to keep going back and forth, rolling back and forth, and then tapping the ends. And again, of course, if you have too much clay on one side, you can just use your clay to smooth it and smear the clay over to where it really should go. So the ends should be completely level and flat, and your sides should be parallel to each other. So your cylinder shouldn't get skinnier or wider. It should be completely uniform throughout the entire cylinder. So the cylinder is one of the easier ones. Okay, now what we'll do is we'll move on to the rectangular prism. And the rectangular prism uses a similar concept to the cube. So first, instead of making a sphere, we're going to roll a cylinder. And then once we roll the cylinder, we're then going to flatten the sides. I'm going to again start by pressing down using my thumb. And then I'll pick it up and tap. Until the Sides flatten out, and then you start to see the emergence of corners. So just check the ends too, make sure that they are squarish looking. Okay. Next comes the cone. The cone is a little bit trickier. What I'm going to do is take my 5th piece of clay and I'm going to roll it into a sphere. And then what I'm going to do is begin to roll out my clay, but I'm going to go really slowly this time because I don't want to stretch out my clay too much. The hardest part about creating the cone is going to be making a very pointed top with very straight sides. It's easy to have wavy sides or have the point start to curl over, so that is kind of difficult. So I'm going to start rolling, and I'm actually going to use this part of my hand, and only this part of my hand. And I begin to roll the clay, and then what I'm going to do is focus more on one side. So I'm going to roll to the right so that I begin to stretch out the clay and make a point. And again, if you just only use that part of your hand and go really gently on the clay, it will start to take shape. Because the end is unfinished, it kind of will look like an ice cream cone, but we'll work on the flat end later. So now you can see the cone-like shape is forming. And we don't want to stretch it out too much. I'm just going to kind of go for just getting a point. And it should definitely look like a point, however, it doesn't have to be really sharp. We don't want to stretch it out too much. And now what I'm going to do is begin to flatten the other side. And again, don't squeeze the clay too hard because you can put fingerprints in the clay and then it looks kind of odd. So this one I really kind of have to throw down to flatten it. I'm knocking my other stuff over. And then I'll go back and roll this a bit. Oops, as I knock other stuff over. Luckily you won't have all this stuff at your table. And again, if you feel like you have displaced clay, you can smooth the clay down. Until it becomes a cone. So this is looking cone-like now. I'm going to resharpen the tip a little bit. Okay, now our last form is going to be a pyramid. So you are going to try that on your own. You are going to start by making a cone, And then you can use the same concepts with the cube and the rectangular prism where you're flattening the sides. So that's going to be a little bit tricky. And let's go for having 4 faces that are upright and then the one square bottom flat side. Okay, so try a pyramid on your own.